Hey y'all, today we're going to be learning how to solve a certain type of equation using factoring. Okay, so you have learned about linear equations. You've also learned about exponential equations. Today we're going to be learning about something called quadratic equations. Before we get into the solving, we need to go over a little bit of vocabulary here. So first, just a reminder, degree means the power or the exponent of some term. So in our example, if we see 2x squared or 2x to the second power, we would call that the second degree term because the degree is 2. If we see 4x, this would be called the first degree term because if we remember x also means x to the first, so its degree or power is 1. And then when we have a number without any exponent or a variable, just a plain old number, that is called a constant term. Okay, so a quadratic equation or expression is one in which the highest degree is 2. So depending on what our variable is, you would see x squared or n squared or t squared or something like that. But the greatest exponent is 2. And then your standard form of a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now notice how the equation equals 0. That is incredibly important for when we start solving. Okay, here are the steps. I'll let you read those on your own. Just make sure the equation equals 0. Super, super, super important. And the thing that's different about quadratic equations from linear equations is that we can sometimes actually have two different solutions. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we're in standard form. So we are, so our equation is equal to 0. Okay, we have our second degree term right here. We have our first degree term right there. We could add a little plus 0 right there if we need to for our constant term. It's not really necessary. So what we need to do now is we need to factor. So I'm looking at this and I notice that both my terms have an x in common. So I'm going to factor out that x. So x squared divided by x is x, and 3x divided by x is 3. Now there's nothing else that I can factor out, so this is as factored as it's going to get, and I need to make sure I bring down that equals 0. Now, I'm going to set each part equal to 0. So set equal to 0. Okay, my two factors, I have x, so there's one factor, and then I have x plus 3 is another factor. Okay, I'm going to set each of them equal to 0. And then I'm going to solve. So x equals 0 is already solved. I don't have to do anything with that. And then for x plus 3 equals 0, I subtract 3 from both sides. Okay, you guys have been doing this kind of stuff for years. So x equals negative 3. So we have two solutions. X equals 0 and x equals negative 3. Now, to check, we need to go back and plug those in. Okay, I'm going to start by checking 0. So 0 squared plus 3 times 0 equals 0. Okay, that's just 0 plus 0 equals 0. That's true, so I know 0 is a solution. I would also check by plugging in negative 3. Be careful here with parentheses. So in parentheses, negative 3, square that, plus 3 times negative 3 equals 0. Negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3. So that's going to give me a positive 9. And then 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. So 9 minus 9 equals 0. Yes, that's true. So negative 3 is also a solution. Okay, so here are two solutions. For number 2, the first thing I notice is that my equation is not equal to 0. So I need to move this 14 over. So I'm going to subtract 14 from both sides. So 4x squared minus 26x minus 14 equals 0. Now I'm in standard form. Now I need a factor. So first I'm going to look for a GCF. Okay, I can divide 4, negative 26, and negative 14, all of them by 2. So I can factor out a 2. That gives me 2x squared minus 13x minus 7 equals 0. I'm going to leave this 2 out here. Okay, so now I need to deal with this. This goes back to that factoring by grouping that we did last week. So I'm going to multiply A and C. So I'm going to keep these first of all. Let me just bring these down and then we'll deal with that. Okay, so 2 times negative 7 gives me negative 14. So I'm going to do the little thing that I learned from another math teacher. This is called the X box. I think I showed this to y'all last week. Okay, so negative 14. And I need to think to myself, what two numbers will multiply to give me negative 14, but will add to give me negative 13? Okay, I got that negative 13 from my first degree term. Okay, so I'm thinking, okay, negative 14 times positive 1, that would multiply to give me negative 14, and negative 14 plus 1 gives me negative 13. So I'm going to break that up, so negative 14x and positive 1x, or just positive x. Okay, now I'm going to bring this up here for some space. I still have that 2 up front. Okay, so I have to factor by grouping. So I'm going to group here, and I'm going to group here. Okay, in my first term, I can factor out a 2x. Okay, so 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Negative 14x divided by 2x is negative 7. And then for x minus 7, there's nothing that I can factor out other than just a 1. And then we still have x minus 7. This should be a parentheses right here. It's kind of messy. Okay, so I need to rewrite these. So I have 2x plus 1 in one set of parentheses, and x minus 7 in the other set of parentheses. Okay, so this is as factored as it's going to get. Now I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So I notice I have a 2 right here. So 2 equals 0. That's not true, so I'm just going to throw that out. That doesn't even matter. 2x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, now we're just going back to 7th grade math here. I wrote an extra little line right there where I don't need it. Actually, I will need it anyway. Okay, so x equals negative 1/2. So that's one solution. And then for x minus 7 equals 0, we add 7 to both sides. So x equals 7. Okay, and these are our two solutions. And remember, you can go back and plug those in for x, and you should get a true equation. If not, then you did something wrong. Next, we are in standard form, so our equation equals 0. So I'm going to look for GCF first. So I look at this, and I notice I can factor out an x from both of these. So when I factor out x, that gives me 5x minus 9. Now I set my factors equal to 0. So x equals 0, and 5x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, x equals 0, there's nothing that we have to solve there. 5x minus 9, we add 9 to both sides. And then divide by 5. So x equals 9/5. Again, We can go back and plug those in just to check our answers and make sure that it gives us a true equation for each one. Number 4 is already in standard form, so I'm going to start factoring. I notice that I can divide both of these by 2, so I'll factor out a 2. And then right here, okay, we need to factor the x squared minus 16. This is a difference of 2 squares. So x squared is a perfect square, and 16 is a perfect square, and we're subtracting them. So when we have a difference of 2 squares, one parentheses gets a plus, one gets a minus. So the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so this is factored out. So we set our factors equal to 0. 2 equals 0 doesn't matter. We can just completely ignore that part. Then we have x plus 4 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. So when we solve for each of those, we get x equals negative 4, and x equals positive 4. Now, when we write our solution, we could either write it like this, or we could also use a special symbol that helps us kind of write it a bit more compactly. We can write it like this, which means plus or minus, or positive or negative 4. Again, plug it in. Make sure you get a true statement for each one. And number 5. Okay, we're not in standard form because we need to deal with this 28. So I'm going to subtract 28 from both sides. Now, I'm not quite done yet. I need to multiply these out. So I'll bring this negative 28 back in a minute. So I need to multiply here. So I'm going to FOIL, or you can use the box method if you prefer that. So x squared minus 8x plus 4x minus 32. And now I'm going to bring in that negative 28 that we had to deal with earlier. And now let's combine our like terms real quick to kind of neaten this up. So x squared minus 4x minus 60 equals 0. Okay, so now we factor. So my first term, my leading coefficient is 1. So that's going to be one of these where I'm going to take my parentheses. X goes in each one. Okay, I need to think to myself, what numbers, I'm looking at this negative 60 right here. What two numbers can multiply to give me negative 60 that will add to give me negative 4? Okay, and this may take a little trial and error at first. Okay, so like negative 1 and 60 will not add up to give me negative 4. So if I go through my list, I can get positive 6 and negative 10. Okay, they multiply to give me negative 60. They add to give me negative 4. So I'm going to put positive 6 in one of these, negative 10 in the other, and don't forget my equals 0. Last, I need to set each of these equal to 0. So if x plus 6 equals 0, then x equals 6, or negative 6. And then if x minus 10 equals 0, then x equals positive 10. So our two solutions are negative 6 and positive 10. Again, plug it in to make sure that it works.